You are listening to the Coach's Locker Podcast with Chris Ford, a place for all coaches to call home. The Coach's Locker Podcast is a part of the Football Coaching Podcast Network. Please visit footballcoachingpodcast.com to hear and see our entire lineup of top football coaches coming to you every single podcast with valuable information to help you and your program. The Coach's Locker Podcast with Chris Ford exists to help prepare coaches to be hired for the job of their dreams and to provide coaches with dynamite resources to become even more successful in their field. You can reach me on Twitter at Coach4, that's at COACHFORE, and my podcast home is at 8laces.org/podcast. That's 8laces, EIGHTLACES.org/podcast. Welcome to the Coach's Locker Podcast with Chris Ford. Now, let's get after it. Well, we're here with Scott Glabb. Coach Glabb is known as one of the best wrestling coaches in the entire state of California. As you can tell by the biography we just read, all of his accomplishments, for all of those accomplishments that he does have, he's one of the most humble coaches and humble men you'll ever meet. As I have noticed, I think a lot of wrestling coaches are a lot more humble than football coaches, I can tell you that. But Coach Glabb, thanks for joining us here on the Coach's Locker Podcast.
Oh, yeah, my pleasure. Privilege to be on.
So, Coach, we start every podcast here kind of just to get the listeners to learn a little bit about our guest with what I call the kickoff, the tip-off, and the first pitch. So I'm going to read a list of 7 questions to you and just kind of get to know a little more about you. So, Coach, Tell us the first team you ever played on and what you remember from that team.
I remember I played T-ball when I was a kid. That was the first team I played on. And I just remember not having very much confidence. I was a kid that played right field and batted last. I was that kid. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Did you have fun? Do you remember?
From what I recall, yeah, I guess it was a little fun. And, stressful a little bit, too, because you want to do well. So, but,
sure.
Yeah.
How about the last team you ever played on?
Well, if you're looking at, I wrestled in college, so that would have been at Eastern Washington University. But the last team I played on was a softball team, a bunch of alumni put together. It's probably about 10 years ago, and I just played first base because I was old and my knees weren't working that well. And but I loved softball. When I moved from Washington to California, I played softball 4 times a week. I was addicted to it because I was never that great of a baseball player. And it was just something I always loved, so I kind of made up for it after I got out of college and played a lot of softball.
That's awesome. I tell you what, there's some stinking competitive adult softball games I've seen out there. Without a doubt. Did you play in slow pitch or fast pitch?
I played fast pitch, modified pitch, and slow pitch.
All
when
right.
I was up in Washington, they had all 3. And then when I came down here, I couldn't find a modified or a fast pitch league, so it was just slow pitch down here.
Gotcha. Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of fast pitch softball in Southern California for men.
Yeah, and I enjoyed that because it was more of the game of baseball because you could bunt and do a lot of the things you can do in a regular baseball game as opposed to softball. But I played up at Eastern Washington University, and what was fun is we'd have to drive out to the middle of nowhere, one of those farm towns, like Davenport or Cooley City, and it'd be like a 30, 40-minute drive, and you just play all these farmers out there. They're in their overalls. They show up. I got my we all got our uniforms on and our cleats, and they show up in their work boots and their hat and their overalls, and that was a blast. And those guys could hum it. That was fast pitch.
Wow.
All these little towns out in the middle of nowhere. And even in a little Indian town, we went to an Indian reservation and played a team out there one time. So that was fun.
Athletics is awesome. I bet those farmers they looked forward to that. Same thing with the Indians. They probably looked forward to that. All day that they were going to get to play some kind of sport during the night. So that's awesome.
Oh,
Coach,
yeah.
who do you consider? Yeah, who do you consider to be your main mentor in the coaching profession?
Oh man, that is tough, man. Because when I first got to California, it was I guess people I would call John Dalem. He was a coach over at Loera High School, a wrestling coach, and then became a principal. And he was one of those guys that I could always call and ask questions about, as well as Alan Clinton, who now coaches over at Servite. Those were the guys I kind of leaned on when I got to California. And it was kind of hard coming to California. It was cliquish. They call it the OC Mafia in wrestling, and there's just a group of guys that back then that just kind of ran the whole organization in Orange County. We have a coaches association in Orange County for wrestling where we do an end of the year banquet for all the wrestlers in the county, and then we have a county wrestling tournament. So I think it's one of the few coaches organizations in the country that kind of come together as a county and take care of all the coaches and the players and whatnot.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. Now, since you've been in that group now, I mean, do you consider yourself one of those in that clique, or is it no longer a clique, or has that changed in the last couple of decades?
It's changed because a lot of those guys have gone on and retired. But sometimes I think the younger guys still feel like the older guys kind of have a handle on it, and end up voting in their buddies to be coaches of the year and things like that, possibly. But yeah, it's changed, and I feel a big part of it. The sad thing is I didn't really get noticed till I started winning. I was kind of the pariah of Orange County wrestling. I was at Santa Ana. They were known to be thugs and thieves. At Laguna Hills, they vandalized the drama room and threw paint around in there. My first year, I was not even invited to a lot of tournaments, so I had to get on the phone and kind of beg a few coaches to let us in. So we just had that real poor perception that coaches had of us. And duly noted, I mean, those kids earned it. So they earned that reputation.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a few minutes here because you've done a tremendous job changing that all around there, and it's why I wanted to have you on here. This is a podcast for coaches from all sports, although a lot of my audience is going to be from the football world, but we've all got a lot to learn from you in terms of how you've ran that program and the results you've gotten. So I'm excited to hear about some of that. Coach, what's the worst mistake you've ever made as a coach?
So I had a kid in the semifinals of the state championships, and the first time I got this kid as a freshman, I always saw him in the finals at the state meet. And this is a moment that is really embarrassing for me to talk about. I wrote about it in my book, but my kid got slammed. We were wrestling the number one kid in the state of California, and he was kind of a mean kid. And pretty late in the first round, he slammed us, and it was an illegal move. A slam is an illegal move. And my kid kind of bounced back up, ready to wrestle, and I knew he had a hurt shoulder, and so I called timeout, and I really just, now that I look back on it, at the time I didn't realize it, but I kind of manipulated the kid to lay down and just go, oh, hey, if you don't go back out there, you get in the finals, and the kid was not that kind of kid. He would have bounced right back in there and wrestled, and he probably would have lost, but I never told the kid to take a fall, like that, because if you do, so basically in wrestling, if it's an illegal move and you get hurt and you can't continue the match, you win, and the other guy loses because what he did was illegal. And so he said okay and got in the finals, and oh my gosh, people booed me, booed him, cussed us out. It was ugly. I got sick to my stomach. It was just one of the biggest regrets I've ever had. It was horrible. And then when he went into the finals later, they were throwing paper planes at him and rubber balls were flying down on the mat. Wow. It was just, wrestling fans can be ugly. They can be pretty ugly.
How did he do in the championship?
He lost. I think it was 9-4. Wasn't close. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting one. Yeah. Well, we've all done something we'd rather turn back the time on at some point.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I'd like to on that one.
Coach, how about your greatest accomplishment? I know you don't like to brag about yourself, but what do you feel? I mean, looking back on, a couple decades plus coaching this sport, wrestling, what do you think is your greatest single accomplishment? Maybe it was a single season, a single team, a single kid.
I would probably look at it the 1999 season, because I had started in 1990, and like I said, it was in real rough shape, and we were getting our butts kicked. And in 1999, we won a CF title. We won the dual meet CF championships. We beat Calvary Chapel, who at that time had already won 5 state titles, I think. They had 5 state titles under their belt. We had beat them in a dual meet pretty handedly. And then we went on to win the Masters tournament. So that's about 300 high schools that have wrestling in Southern California. There's, 525 high schools, and over 300 have wrestling. So we won the Masters meet. And then we went to the state meet, and we were in first place on Friday night, and then we finished 4th in the state in 1999. So from being last in league in 1990 to being 4th in state that year. And then one of my kids won the national high school championships that year, too, in 1999. So awesome. That was a banner year. I would say that was one of the most memorable moments in my career, as well as accomplished.
Yeah, outstanding. Mm-hmm. And Coach, how about off the coaching path here? What's your favorite place to go on vacation?
The couch.
The couch.
I just love coming home and laying on the couch and watching TV. I mean, awesome. I know it's sad. If a vacation spot, I guess if I had to go on vacation, I'd go up to Washington, where I'm from, and just visit family and friends. I love to go up there and just see old friends and drive around and visit everybody. So I guess that would be a vacation for me, even though it is a lot of stress. But
Coach, I read in one of the articles I was reading to get prepared for this interview, I think you came here down to California. I think you said something about a state you didn't like or a state you didn't want to go to, but you ended up landing your first job here.
Yeah, so my sister lives in California along with a girlfriend that I was dating, and I'd come down to visit, and I did not like California at all. I mean, I guess they live down around by the beach and stuff, so I felt like a lot of people are arrogant, snobby, and also I probably dressed like a tourist, so that didn't help, you know. They I got my flip-flops and my Hawaiian shirt on. I didn't know what to dress like when I came down here. So this was just the last place on earth I really wanted to be. I did not enjoy this place at all. I didn't really care what the weather was like, but this was not where I wanted. I wanted to be up in the suburbs of Seattle, up around Kent, Auburn area. In that area is where I really envisioned myself living and teaching and coaching and making a career there.
But then you end up being here for 30 years as a head coach.
I know it.
It's pretty funny.
And you know what's funny is we're both Christians, and I just kept saying to myself, I'm going back to Washington. And I did the 2 years at Marina, and then I did a year at Santa Ana, and my girlfriend moved back to Washington. I go, okay, I'll be up there this summer. And I kept wanting to go back. I yearned for it, and then I went back, and it wasn't the same. Nothing was the same. And I think the Lord pulled me back there and just said, okay, enough is enough. Quit yearning for this place. Quit wanting to come back here. I have work for you to do in Santa Ana. And the job was open. Nobody took the job, and I came back in October, and they slid me into a long-term sub position in math, and that was it. And I didn't ever kind of have that yearning or want to go back again. I miss Washington, but there's nothing there for me except my mom and sister.
Yeah, it's interesting how God works in those ways. That's a cool story. Coach, what's your favorite thing to do outside of coaching, outside of family? Any hobbies, or if you got to spend a day?
I like to go to movies.
Movies,
I love movies. It relaxes me, and I'll go by myself. If nobody wants to go with me, I'll go by myself.
You know what? That's awesome. I like doing the same thing.
Yeah. I don't have any real hobbies that, I have coins I collect, but I don't make it, if I come across them, and, there's baseball cards I used to collect. But as far as having a hobby, I just like to relax and go to movies. As you know, I don't know what it is, but teaching just sucks the life out of you with the coaching on top of those two things. And when I get home, I just kind of want to veg, you know.
Yeah.
And you have kids, and then you got to run around and take care of your kids and drive them all over the place. So
Yeah.
I'm happy I just stayed home this weekend, just kind of relaxed, you know.
Cool, very good.
So, yeah.
Well, Coach, tell us how you got into wrestling. I mean, you wrestled in high school, you wrestled in college. How did How did you start your career in coaching?
Well, I just remember when I was a junior in high school at wrestling practice one day, I just told myself I wanted to be a wrestling coach. And then I knew that I had to be a teacher to be a wrestling coach because, I mean, they just don't hire wrestling coaches. Back then there was no such thing as a walk-on in the late 70s, early 80s. I never heard of one. So I just knew that that's what I wanted to do. I mean, I wasn't good at anything else. I was too short for basketball. Baseball, I was sitting the bench. It was just the only thing I found a little success in. And so I just kind of ran with it. And it was just always my focus, my ambition. I never wavered from it. It was just something that I always knew I was going to do. And that's why I did it in college and just kind of worked out for me that way.
Was there a coach that you, like, I know when I played high school football, I came to just really look up to the coaches that I played for, and that some of those guys are the ones who really kind of inspired me. Was it coaches you looked up to, or just your love of the game?
Just the love of the sport. It wasn't, we had a coaching change my junior year, so one coach stepped down and another coach filled in, and that coach, Charlie Lemke, I ended up going to college where he went. So he had a lot to do with it. I mean, he was one of those gruff, big, he was an NAIA All-American at 189 pounds. He was just very intimidating looking. And so I looked up to him. And even though at the time he wasn't a Christian, he told me, hey, I'm an atheist and, you don't need to come preach to me and I won't preach to you. And I'm going, okay, I wonder where that came from. When I was in high school, I made this shirt called Powered by Jesus. It was just something I went to a t-shirt shop and made. So I wore that and it said Evergreen Wrestling on the front. And so, I don't know, maybe that, he told me one time, why don't you get another shirt, like something like baked beans or something else? And I just said, you're funny, coach. So, but I still respected him and looked up to him, even though we might not have seen eye to eye in regard to faith. I mean, he was still my coach, and I still learned from him. And then when I got out of college, I went over and assisted him for a couple of years over at the high school.
So that was your first job there, then, assisting at the school you went to?
Yeah, well, I assisted up in Eastern Washington University. I went to Cheney High School. A friend of mine's uncle was the head coach, and she said, hey, you can go over. I talked to my uncle, and you can go over and help him out. So that was just when I was a workout partner. I just went in and worked out with some of the kids, but probably up at Evergreen, where I went back to high school, is the first time I got a chance to kind of really coach. So
yeah. And so when you got your taste of it as an assistant, did you start thinking, man, I'd love to be a head coach? Or did you kind of think before you even started coaching you were going to be a head coach someday?
You know what's a great question. I didn't really think about being a head coach. I just knew that I was going to coach someday, and, whether it be an assistant, it wasn't really something I thought about until I applied for that head coaching job at Marina and kind of realized you don't know what you're getting yourself into, especially as young as I was 26. And at the time when you're 26, you think you know it all, but my gosh, there was a lot to learn, and I made some mistakes, and it was pretty frustrating.
Do you see, I really don't know a whole lot about the wrestling world, Coach, to be honest with you. As an athletic director, the first school I was an AD at, we had no wrestling, and then the second one I was at, I actually started a wrestling program there, and
good for you.
Yeah, it was awesome because I surveyed all the kids and families when I got there, and it was up here in the high desert.
Right.
There's some great wrestling programs up here in the high desert, and there was a lot of interest on those surveys for a wrestling program, and so it's something I took to my administration, and I called, I grew up down in the San Diego area, so I called the best guy I know down there who ran wrestling at Poway High School. Yeah. You named him, exactly. I called him to pick his brain on just everything. He spent probably 3 hours on the phone with me.
Oh, good.
Yeah, just a tremendous guy. I didn't know
Mm-hmm.
where should I buy headgear from, where should I buy uniforms, what should I look for in a coach, but
Mm-hmm.
he was tremendous. And so in the wrestling world, are you seeing guys, who coach for, like you did? You coached for 2 years, right? And then you coached for
Mm-hmm.
about 2 years and became a head coach?
Yeah. You see a little bit of that. These younger guys, though, in wrestling, they just, I don't think they realize the time commitment.
Yeah.
And so some of them start off being an assistant and they have good intentions, but then they just realize the time commitment. I mean, you're talking 12-hour days on Fridays and Saturdays, getting up at 6 in the morning, going to weigh-ins, and then sitting around for 10 to 12 hours waiting for your kids to finish wrestling. And then you got to do the same thing again the next day. And then the following week, you got to maybe a league duel in here or a lower level league tournament or a dual meet tournament for the lower levels. It's a huge sacrifice when it comes to wrestling. That's one of the worst things about the sport is just how much time it takes. Yeah. So I think when they get in there, these younger guys, it's hard to find somebody that really wants to do it. We found somebody this year that's really good, and one of my alumni that's going to take over for me, and you can tell he has the passion for it. That's what you need. You need to really have a passion and a love, and you got to realize why you're really in it for the kids. If you're getting in it because you think you're going to win, then you're going to be in a little bit of trouble. I noticed they like to also stand alongside or take credit. They like to coach the good kids in the room. They like to be able, I guess a good quarterback. They want to be able to say, well, I worked out with this kid, and they like to be able to, get a little credit for, being able to coach a kid that goes on to win a state title or that's really successful. I notice a lot of the younger guys do that and don't give enough attention to the newer kids or the ones that might be a little slower.
Yeah, I think that's happening in a whole lot of sports, at the high school level across the board these days. Is there a club wrestling movement in Southern California that's ruining the high school wrestling movement at all, or no?
I don't think it's ruining it, but their kids are probably like you're seeing in football. They're just transferring all over the place.
Yeah.
They're moving all over because there's a lot of kids clubs. In fact, nowadays, if you don't start wrestling early on, if you think you're going to come out for wrestling as a freshman or even a sophomore, I had some kids that were able to get to state back in those days, but today that's just not going to happen.
Wow.
I mean, there's kids growing up wrestling. They're eat, breathe, sleep wrestling. And then where I'm at in a community where they don't value athletics, I get some kid goes, hey, I want to try this. And I go, you have no idea. You've got so much work to make up. And, some kids stick it out, but a lot of kids there quit because they go out and get pounded on, and they just said, this isn't worth it. They think, I tell them, this is their Parks and Rec. This is a legit, real wrestling program. But, they have no athletic experience. They might play a little street soccer over there, but their parents never could afford to put them in any sports or little league or anything like we do our kids. So they have no athletic experience whatsoever, most of them.
Yeah, Coach, tell the listeners, because we've got people from all over, the nation and wherever listening. I don't know where they all are, but tell everybody about Santa Ana and Santa Ana High School, because again, I hit on it a little bit in the intro here,
right.
but to hear from you, tell us about Santa Ana, your area, and the high school, because that's what's so impressive to me is this isn't this isn't a private school. It's not a beach city with, your kids going home to $1 million houses. Tell us a little bit about your area.
So Santa Ana is 98% Hispanic. The high school is 98% Hispanic. I would say we have an ESL, English language learner, population of about 60%. And back in 2000, it was the #1 city in the nation for economic hardship. So that's based on an annual salary of about $16,000 per family, and so overcrowded. I mean, we've got 2 to 3, 4 families living in 2-bedroom homes or 2-bedroom apartments, 3-bedroom homes. They're just stacked up one on top of the other at some of these places.
Wow.
It's #1 in Orange County for homicides, a lot of the crime that takes place. So it's a tough place to live for those kids. That's why I wrote the book. There's just some heartbreaking stories, and there's no sense, makes no sense. But the parents, they just kind of focus on, they don't value education. They just value work. And if they can get their kids to quit and go work, then they've succeeded. So a lot of those kids just have, no hope in regards to support from their family. Not all of them, but there's a huge majority of them. You go to a wrestling match, and I might see 2 or 3 parents in the stands if I'm lucky. And I was over 100 kids for probably the last 10, 15 years. It's just the last year or so I finished with about 80. So my numbers are real good, but in regards to parental support, it's horrible. But then on the other hand, I don't get any nasty emails. I don't have to deal with any parents calling me up and saying, how come my kid's not wrestling? I mean, I can count that in 28 years, maybe 5 times I've had to deal with parents that were pissed at me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah, there's pluses and minuses in that kind of parentless environment.
Yeah, and I'm used to it. And I just figured out, I was raising about $50,000 a year for some time. I was doing great with the fundraising, and I just figured out how to do it without them.
Wow.
Didn't complain. Didn't ask my administration or AD for much. I just said, if I want things, I'm just going to have to go out there and hustle up some fundraising. So
yeah, that's a lot of money there, Coach. What was your best fundraiser down there?
So we had a couple fireworks stands, and then we'd host these, that would pull in about, during the good years, $25,000 profit.
Nice.
And then we would do these jiu-jitsu tournaments or pancration tournaments. Some of those would pull in about $8,000 in a day. And we work for the politicians. You know how the campaigns are coming up? This is probably the smartest thing I ever did is they would have the kids go out and walk precincts and do phone banking, and then in turn they would make a donation to the team, $1,000, $2,000, $3,000. But more than that, I got all these politicians on my side, people on the school board, city council, U.S. Congressman Lou Correa has become a good friend of mine. And so when you need something, it's just a phone call, and they get on it for you because it's like, well, Glabb sent his kids to help us with the campaign, and we're going to need them again. And it's a win-win. And then those kids get community service hours. They get a little certificate from the congressman. They can put it on their resume. It was the smartest thing I ever did.
How'd you come across that?
One of my wrestlers came up to me in '96, and he goes, hey, I know this guy's running for assembly, and that was Lou Correa when he first started. And he's just wondering if you got some kids that want to come over and help. And I said, yeah, what the hell? And I just sent some kids over there. And then all of a sudden, people started hearing about how well we did walking precincts. And I started getting phone calls. I had one fall where I just didn't even have enough kids to farm out. I was working with senators, congressmen, assembly people, city council. And then they would give them jobs, too. They would hire those kids if they liked them to work the campaign. So
that's awesome. I've never heard of that.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
And we had a principal for a few years that was kind of, I don't know. I was AD then, and it was hard working with her. And she told me I wasn't going to get any money for the state meet. And I go, the district always pays for the state meet. Let me call down there. And they got mad that I was going to call the district and get it squared away. But then in a meeting with all the principals, she asked, do you think he's going to call Lou Correa on me? So, she did. She asked one of the principals that because he told me. And it's like, yeah, I am going to call him if I don't get this fixed.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and there's a couple people on the school board. Their sons wrestled for me, and Lou Correa sent his son to wrestle for me to our school. And so, yeah, it's like if I need anything and I'm getting a little pushback from somebody, and I don't try to, but if it's for the kids, I'll make a phone call. I want to host something in the gym, and they want to charge me $500. This is a fundraiser, and they fix it.
Yeah. It's Coach. Have you seen? I mean, three decades here, 3 decades of coaching. Have you seen that administrative support just get worse and worse every year?
Honestly, it just depends on the administrator.
Yeah, changes.
The one I have now, oh my gosh, he was one of our APs when I first started, and he was like, he was in charge of discipline, and he just crucify kids. He would just rake them over the coals, and if he could send them to jail, he would. Now he's our principal. Totally opposite. Everything he can do for a kid, he will do for a kid, and he knows what I do for kids. And he has just said, whatever you need, whatever I can help you with. He's never really denied me anything. And he goes to all of our matches. He goes to the Masters meet and the CIF, and he takes pictures. And he really promotes our school on Facebook. And we're starting to get more and more kids in our community to come to Santa Ana because he's really blown our school up on Facebook. And he just shows all the positive things that are going on.
Yeah, that's great.
People are seeing it. So
that's a lot of good
he's
support.
He's a huge supporter of if you're taking care of kids and you're doing your job in the classroom, he'll back you up.
Yeah.
He'll leave you alone or back you up or give you what you need. They find a way. So I've always been blessed there in regard to getting what I needed. They haven't really pushed back on a lot of things. They've really, to be honest, taken care of us.
Yeah, that's good. How about in other, maybe not in your school, but other schools down there in Orange County, Southern California? Are wrestling programs having a more difficult time with administrators?
Oh, yeah. I hear horror stories from those guys all the time.
Yeah.
That they're just getting a lot of pushback, and you can't do this, and you can't do that. And it's like, well, we can. Why can't you? Even in our district, they're getting pushback from other, even our district's like, I know how much money we get. I was AD, and these guys are only giving you $500 for the season. Really? While I'm getting a lot more than that just to pay for my tournaments. And so, they just, I guess it's looked at as the redheaded stepchild of sports, and they just don't really have a lot of respect for it, or they just maybe might seem to be a pain in the butt. And now that girls wrestling started, now they have to find a girls stipend.
Oh, yeah,
for wrestling.
Yep.
But once again, our district, I get 6 stipends for my coaches and then another 2 for girls. I mean, 8 stipends for wrestling. Where do you see that at?
Yeah, that's outstanding. Yeah. Yeah, very good.
But it's just because I have a lot of numbers, and you work hard. Like I said, you work hard, they'll take care of you.
So what motivated you, Coach? Because I'm sure as you progressed there, as you started to win, as you started to build that program, you started getting notoriety in Southern California and the state as a wrestling coach. What motivated you to stay there? I'm sure there were different offers along the way that may have been attractive. What motivated you to stay in a rough area like Santa Ana?
Well, honestly, I never got any offers to go anywhere else ever. And I think, and I'll tell you why, because it was my ministry. I had to look at Santa Ana High School and the wrestling program as a ministry. When I first got there, we were losing. You saw 72-0, 53-8. We're getting hammered. And I was standing outside the wrestling room door one day, and the Lord told me, "You're never going to win here, so just focus on, invest in the kids." And I remember I came a Christian at 13 years old, and it changed my life. So I thought, okay, I'll just get them going to FCA camp, and I'll be a mediocre coach with a mediocre program. And I just gave up on winning that day. And a lot of young coaches put their self-worth in winning. They think in order for them to be anybody, they have to win. And that's the same way I felt until that moment. And then I just said, this is it. And then all of a sudden the next year we're 26-3 and we were doing well. And I just always looked at it as a ministry, and you get caught up in the expectation of winning, and you know how that is.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes I felt a lot of pressure, and on occasion I'd forget what my real ministry is. And that's when I would see things kind of start to not fall apart, but, God pull me back a little bit and say, hey, what's the real reason you're here? And so I just always kept that a focus. And nothing ever came up, no other opportunities. They were always good to me there. I have a teaching job, and I don't know, it went fast. It's funny because I remember going in my first year, and they had in the auditorium all the old timers up on the stage, Ron May, 30 years, and Ron Ditto, 35 years. And I'm saying, God, those guys are losers. Why are they here so long? And now I'm one of those losers. So I don't know.
Funny.
But it was a good fit after I got used to it and understood the culture a little bit. My biggest regret is I never learned Spanish. My brain doesn't work that way. And as much as I heard, I hardly picked anything up. That's a huge regret I have.
Interesting, yeah. So going back, two follow-ups there. Going back, your team, you guys lost a match 72-0. I mean, I don't know what's the football equivalent to that, Coach?
Oh, I don't know.
50-0.
I guess 50-0. It's like they needed. That's like back then there was 13 weight classes. That means 11 of those kids got pinned.
Wow.
And,
wow.
Yeah, and 2 got majored or whatever. So it's 2 points away from getting, smoked. 78-0 was the total score you could score in a wrestling match back then.
Okay.
So
it
was humiliating. It was embarrassing.
Was that your first season at Santa Ana?
That was my first season. It was against Huntington Beach High School, and Tito Ortiz was on that team, if you know who he is. Yeah, Tito wrestled there, and he was on that team then. And they had a solid team. They took second CIF that year, and it was embarrassing. Plus on top of all the other problems I had with those kids, and everybody knew.
Yeah. How many kids in the program that first year?
30. Maybe
30 kids.
I don't even know how many were left after the grades came out. That's another big epidemic there.
Yeah.
I just remember going up to kids that were first-year wrestlers. I go, "You want to be varsity?" "Okay," and I'd throw him in. "How about you?"
Wow.
I remember throwing a couple freshmen in at varsity. For me, I was trying to fill a lineup. I wanted to go to league finals and wrestle duels with a full lineup. I did not want forfeits. So I'm kind of more of a team-oriented guy. Some programs like Calvary Chapel focus more on the individual, and they're not real worried about having a full team, because if they have 5 studs, they could win a state title. I was kind of leaning more towards trying to fill a lineup up.
So you were trying to fill a varsity lineup with freshman kids sometimes that first year. Now, looking at, 28 years later at that same school, how many kids are competing for one varsity spot?
Just depends on the weight class. There could be, in the middle weight classes, 6 to 7.
Wow.
And in the lower and upper weight classes, 3 to 4 to 5.
Yeah.
So,
that's a whole different world for you. So how did you bounce back? Like, did you think of quitting it all that first year? I mean, how did you deal with that emotionally, dealing with such a bad program?
Well, like I said earlier, it's just I knew that this was going to be my ministry, and that I was there to try to at least, plant seeds for kids and introduce them to Jesus Christ. Whether or not they take it or accept it was one thing. And I just started sending them to FCA camp. I started FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes. I started a huddle there. I started one at Marina. It didn't go well. I didn't get very many kids. I think I only got one kid to one meeting there. But I started at Santa Ana, and we'd do it after practice in the evenings on Mondays in the gym, and I would have a good turnout. 10, 15, 20 kids. We'd play kickball, have pizza, have guest speakers, share. It's not like going to church. And then with that, I would send them to camps and different FCA functions. And I just knew that that's what I was there to do in that capacity. So I don't know. I don't know if I was really planning on bouncing back. I didn't anticipate us doing very well, to be honest with you, the second year or the third year.
Yeah. What stands out the most from that first year as a head coach at Marina High School to you now?
Oh, at Marina? Well, I came in with the philosophy my coach coached with, and you follow the rules, no excuses, can't be lenient, and it just didn't work. It didn't work there. And I was depressed and really suicidal when I came down from Washington. I got really depressed and went into a psychiatric care unit in 1988, right before I came down. And I was in there on a 5150, which is, a threat to yourself or somebody else. And my youth pastor kind of talked me into going in, and I got on some medication and started getting some therapy. Probably the most embarrassing thing, I went on welfare because I had 2 college degrees and went on welfare. And when I got down here, I was selling snow cones just to get by. And there's a little thing in my book about that, how a homeless guy made off with more money washing windows than I did selling snow cones that day. I gave him a free snow cone and a couple bucks to wash my windows. So I was pretty down and out when I got here. And so I just was dealing with that whole thing. And so I carried that with me to Marina. and I just felt really disrespected by some of the kids there, which I took things personal because of my depression. And I just left there after the second year. I just quit because I just couldn't deal with the fog of disrespect that was looming around me.
So how did you bounce out of that?
I had a pastor that I went through about 3 or 4 years of therapy, weekly therapy, gave me some really good books to read, gave me assignments, and then it came down to, after about 4 years, all I wanted to do was play catch with my dad. My dad was an alcoholic, and he wasn't around when I was a kid. My parents got divorced when I was 7. So for him, it was more important to chase women and drink. And my senior year in high school, he told me that he does drugs and it's okay for me to do drugs too. And it's just like, are you kidding me?
Wow.
So he was a real piece of work. And so a lot of those were those issues dealing with him, just, rejection, abandonment issues, things like that, not feeling worthy, not measuring up to standards. And so it was just a lot of work. And to be honest with you, I still kind of go through bouts of depression today when I find myself not busy. I think having a team, going to Santa Ana, those kids, I needed them as much as they needed me. I found my purpose. I found the reason I was supposed to be on this earth. And when you find that, then it makes things a lot easier for you. And when you keep your mind busy off of all the other crap that you're thinking about, then you're able to kind of bounce out of it. But there's days where I might, in the summertime, sometimes when I'm not doing stuff, it kind of creeps up on me a little bit. So, but I'm still on medication today for it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's very interesting, Coach. I did not know about that part of your background as far as, battling that kind of depression. And I know it's something a lot of people, nationwide definitely deal with. So it's good to hear a coach talk about that. How did you, how did you get over having bad days and having to go be a leader and a teacher? Just something you just got to...
It's funny because up in Washington, I coached up in Washington for a year, and I was subbing, and then I just quit subbing, and I was coaching in Kent, Washington, where I thought I was going to end up living, and I would lay in bed, and then when wrestling practice came, I'd pop out of bed, I'd go over to practice, I'd fake it, I was funny, I enjoyed the kids, I built relationships, and then I'd come home and crawl into my room and into my bed and go back to sleep. I don't know. It's one of those things. Hey, I have a purpose. I have a reason. I better get up. I better go do this. And then it just you got to keep busy. It's just one of those things. I just had to keep my mind occupied, And back then there were no video games to sit in front of in a TV, and it was a spiritual warfare too. I think there was just it was a big spiritual warfare because I think Satan knew I was going to come down here and do some work, and I just think it was his way of trying to stop me.
Sure.
I almost did. I thought about it every day. I was just too scared to commit suicide because I didn't want to go to hell.
Wow.
And then get down there and then go, oh, great. Hey, now I got to go through the same damn thing I just went through for the last 10 years down here. Yeah. So that was really the only thing that kept me from doing it, was my faith and figuring out that one of these days, hopefully it'll all go away. But, Paul says, I think it's in Romans, that we all have a thorn in the flesh, and I guess that's just my thorn in the flesh. That's the one thing that's going to just always gnaw at me, or that one thing I've just got to work through and keep fighting.
Yeah. So, Coach, how did you go about, turning around that perception? You talked about, not being able to get your Santa Ana High School into tournaments and that sort of thing. After, your first year there, they were, known as the bad boys down there, so to speak. How did you go about turning that perception of the program around?
So what we did is we went to a lot of tournaments, and at the end of a tournament, the gym, I don't know if you've ever seen a wrestling tournament, people are messy. They leave messes all over the place. So I thought, you know what? We're going to help these guys clean up the gym. So the tournament would be over with, and all the teams are leaving, and, well, my kids can't leave because I got the bus. I'm in charge. So you're not getting on the bus until those bleachers are cleaned up. And go over there and help roll that mat. And, hey, you grab that broom and start sweeping the gymnasium floor. And I would have my kids stay there and help them clean up the mess from the tournament and help the other team roll up the mats. And so how can you, I don't know, it's like, and then, we started winning the tournaments and staying and cleaning up. So what can you say bad about us? I mean, We just got done cleaning everything up, and people just needed to give those kids a chance. And they're really good kids. They just, they're just grown up in a rough neighborhood, but they're some really nice kids, and people just started, getting to know those kids a little bit more, and, things changed, and I always tell them, you got to be a class act. Wherever we go, you got to be a class act. That was just one of the things I always kept harping on them about, So I think a lot of that just, and then we'd work tables at tournaments. If they didn't have anybody, I'd bring some kids over, and you could work a table and just kind of help those guys, because those tournaments are really brutal to run. Yeah. They're no fun.
Yeah. How did you, I'm sure you had kids who didn't want to do that extra stuff, right?
There's always going to be a couple kids.
Yeah. How'd you motivate those guys?
Up there? I just say, hey, you know what? We're not leaving till you help out.
Yeah.
And, they might pick up a couple things here or there. You always have those guys. Always. My state champ this year, I don't think he picked up one piece of trash this year. He was just one of those kids. He's not going to do it. And you know what? He's not leaving until we're not leaving until it's all done. So whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, you're just always going to have those kids.
So then you start winning those tournaments, and then you're still picking up the trash. How are your kids dealing with that kind of success? How did that transition go from, bad program, losing 72-0 to winning tournaments?
Well, I think they enjoyed it. They had fun. Back then, there wasn't a lot of winning. Football was winning in the early 90s at Santa Ana. Oh, yeah, and soccer a little bit, and cross country. But the kids that I get, they're not kids playing those sports. They're not athletes. The kids that I'm getting are kids who couldn't find anywhere else to belong. They were cut from. You got to remember, a lot of teams cut too, and you can. I don't think they cut in football, right? Do you guys cut in football?
Yeah, usually not.
Right, but if you don't get to play the first 5 or 6 games, that usually pretty much tells the kid, well, I guess I'm cut anyway.
Yeah.
So you would get as I call the leftovers. I would take everybody's leftovers. I'd tell the basketball coach and the soccer coach, hey, if you cut anybody, send them over to me,
Yeah.
And I did 1 year freshman football and was able to pull a few good kids from that group, the kids that didn't have a lot of talent but had a lot of heart and determination. So I think once we started winning a little bit too, more and more kids would come out. So I think it just kind of snowballed. So they handled it pretty well.
That's good.
I think they're so surprised or shocked that they're a champion or that they won a CIF title or, there's not a lot of good that happens for those kids in that city.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't even go on vacations, Chris.
Yeah.
Those kids don't even, they don't even go on vacations.
Yeah, I'm working now at a school with kind of the same clientele, not as high as a percentage of the poor kids, but pretty high, 75% or so are in that category. And we had a final, and there was an option. I teach English, so they had to write an essay. And, to hear about one of the 4 options they had was write about your dream vacation. And, when I was in high school, a dream vacation was like, man, I'd love to go to Cabo San Lucas, or I'd love to go to Hawaii. I'd never been to Hawaii, I think. And, something, but I still at least knew about it,
Right.
And these kids are like, I'd love to go to Los Angeles. I'd love to go visit my grandparents in Mexico. And it was really interesting reading through their assignments this week. Yeah. So, Coach, I think one of the hardest things about coaching, and I know you've been in this boat with a lot of kids, is when you see a kid with just a ton of talent, a ton of ability. And like you said, maybe I know I've had these kids in a Hispanic culture here in Southern California where their parents, they don't let them play or they make them quit to go work, like you mentioned earlier. How do you deal? How do you personally deal with those kids, those single kids, those one-on-one, when you know that they have the talent and ability, but they quit maybe on their own or they quit because their parents are making them? How have you dealt with that throughout your career?
So some of these kids, I had a kid in 1998 or 1994, Tony Perez, and he was a good little 103-pounder for us. And his parents wanted him to quit because they got tired of him coming home at night late. And so I sent a family friend over and another ex-wrestler over to talk to the parents. And they said, okay, if he can get a ride home. And so I said, sure, I'll give that kid a ride home. That kid was a national champion, high
Wow.
school national champion in '98. And it's like those parents almost stole that kid's dream, you know? I mean, that kid's going to have that memory for the rest of his life. And it's just funny how they don't see the value in it at all. So if I have to, I'll go talk to parents, or I'll send somebody to go talk to a parent, you know, or I'll get one of my, Gilbert Melendez, the guy who, the UFC fighter, his dad would go over with me or call parents and talk to them about keeping kids out. So because his son wrestled and he didn't know anything about the sport, had no clue about wrestling, but he saw how it helped his kids. So I just find somebody to come alongside him. Lou Correa will help me out with some people. Some of those politicians will help me out. I just, you know, I get on the phone and I do what I can, and sometimes they don't budge, and sometimes they do. And you know, when you give it, like they say, the old college try, at least I can say, hey, I tried. I gave it everything I had to try to keep you out, you know. And the other thing is, too, is a kid can have a little something to say. A lot of these kids don't speak up to their parents. They're just, well, that's what they told me, so that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Where I had a kid that came through our kids program, and then the parents were going to send him to another school, and the kid said, well, I'm going to get kicked out the first day then. And the parents, huh?
Wow.
And then the dad goes, just let him go to Santa Ana. And the mom's just really resistant. But they let him go, and he was a state placer. And the parents still, that was 2011, those parents still helped me out with football stand and the fireworks stand.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great story.
Sometimes kids know more than the parents.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
They got to feel for it a little more than the parents do.
So, Coach, I asked you to come on to share some of these wisdoms and nuggets about coaching, some of your experience to help coaches out there. You didn't ask me at all, but I'd love to promote your book here. Tell me a little bit about A Saint in the City. I know that it's available on Amazon. How did you go about writing a book, man? Because I wrote one a few years ago. I've had a lot of guys ask or say, hey, I have an idea on a book. Can you help me? Yeah. And then they disappear. I mean, it is really, really difficult to write a book. So talk to me a little bit about the process for you, how that worked, and why you wanted to put a book together and what it's all about.
Yeah. So I had a friend at school say, hey, you got a lot of stories. You ought to write a book. And then my doctor, he does a lot of the physicals at school, and he'd say the same thing. Oh, you should write a book. And so I just sat down and started writing, but I was such a horrible typist that I hired a ghostwriter, and I recorded everything and hired this guy to type it all up. But it was 10 years before I got the confidence to even get it published. A friend of mine knew the president of a publishing company, and I got started with them, and then I just kind of dropped the ball. And then I went back to the NCAs, and a guy was out there selling a book. It was fiction called Near Fall about Michael and Maddie and their experiences wrestling. And I read it, and I go, are you kidding me? Oh, my gosh. So that kind of motivated me. I go, this is nothing, and I got a lot better stories. So I just, I got back in touch with the publishing company, and I just kind of went through the process. It was pretty grueling, back and forth with editing. And then they published it for me. But then they went bankrupt. They were embezzling all our royalties. They had 35,000 authors. So this was like 2 years ago. So I was in the process of doing my second edition, and that halted. And so recently I found somebody who did a really good job with the second edition through CreateSpace.
Yeah.
And I didn't have as much success as I wanted to. It's kind of funny. I go to the Masters meet, 2,000 people, wrestling fans walk in front of me, and I sell 10 books in a day. It's kind of discouraging that a lot of your friends won't even buy it. But what I did with the second edition, I added 2 chapters on girls wrestling because we had 2 girls that were state champs, and one girl didn't go to college and one girl did. So it's their stories and how they had to fight against the culture and what their parents thought they should be doing as opposed to what they wanted to do.
Wow. And
then I did more on Gilbert Melendez and added more on some of the wrestlers and where they're at. And then I did curriculum for it. So I've got really good curriculum, Common Core state standards that align with the chapters, and it's all based on intrinsic motivation. So each chapter now has a principle that you're going to learn, like forgiveness, our perseverance, our mental toughness, our choices, things like that. And so created the curriculum. So now what I'm going to do with it is I'm going around just talking to people and pitching it, and got some support from the Orange County Department of Ed, and a friend of mine in West Covina is going to buy 500 copies. And
wow.
So that's my next goal. I'm going to go one more year at Santa Ana teaching, and then I just want to get out there and get my book into schools and get kids reading it. Because the teachers that have read it at my school, the kids like it. They can relate with it. It's right up their alley. And so that's kind of my next goal. And then just to do coaching workshops. I just want to share my story and encourage young coaches to go into places like I did. I think they'll feel more satisfied if they walk into a school like mine and try to build a program. Because everybody just wants to jump on the bandwagon and jump on board a school that's already winning or already has some success under their belt, because that's easy.
Yeah. No, without a doubt, it brings a lot of satisfaction when you're able to turn something into a winner, you know, and you've certainly done that, Coach. We appreciate your time here with us on the Coach's Locker podcast, and I certainly want to encourage everyone to check out Coach Glabb's website. That's asaintinthecity.com, asaintinthecity.com. Coach, I'm going to give away one book. I'm going to make sure to buy a couple books, and I'm going to give one away to somebody listening here to this podcast. Once we send this out, I think this is going to be out in a few weeks, and I'm gonna.
Well, I can send one to you and sign it.
There you go. Perfect.
Give away.
So somebody listening to this is going to get a free copy of Coach's book, A Saint in the City. The rest of you check that out, asaintinthecity.com. Coach Glabb, thanks a lot. Yeah, you have a great rest of the day.
Oh, yeah. Okay, you too, Chris. Bye.